Certainly good to be back with you tonight. Appreciate those willing to come back for a second dose after today. I mentioned this morning, this isn't necessarily a topic you think of when you're thinking about selecting elders and deacons, but I do think it's one that does. And when you really think about being a peacemaker and not getting angry and not wanting to fight, certainly that the selection of elders and deacons and just getting that in place can certainly cause some strife and conflict. And so I think it's important for us to, and again, I think it applies obviously not just to what we're doing in terms of selecting men, but also just in our everyday living. And again, it's a shame, but many times there's just people looking for a fight. And that's just not the way it should be, or we should be as Christians. So we noticed this morning, we talked about righteous anger or the righteous battle we all fight. And so there are some things that we should get angry about. And it's very appropriate to be mad and angry. And when it comes to defending the causes of Christ and speaking up against things that are wrong. We noticed some things about wisdom and anger. Tonight, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about forms of sinful anger and in how to handle anger. And so, first verse tonight we want to focus on is found in Proverbs chapter 22, 24 through 25. It says, make no friendship with an angry man, and a furious man do not go, lest you learn his ways and set a snare for your soul. Many times people think we can go around people. Sometimes we are attracted to certain people. I don't know why, but there's been many times with our children, we're like, man, I wish you wouldn't hang around that person, or they didn't hang around that person. And they may think I can be around them and I can influence them for good, right? They're not going to affect me. I can be a good influence to them. But it says here, lest you learn his ways. So it's not good to be around certain types of people. And again, Proverbs has a lot to say about angry, but being friends with those that are angry and spending time with them, we need to be careful because it'll rub off on you. How many times you see a young child and they're just a spitting image of their dad or their mom, and they just copy what they were, what they did, and how they acted around their children. So we need to be careful we don't get influenced by those of the world. In Ephesians chapter 4, verse 31, 32, it says, let all bitterness, wrath, anger, clamor, and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice. There's, we think about the idea of someone who wants to cause pain or injury or distress to someone else. There are people who like that. There's people who like to cause harm and to cause you to get upset or even be injured by some action or something that happens. And I don't know if you've ever seen that. Sometimes people laugh about, right? Somebody getting hurt or maybe some kind of calamity that somebody experiences, and they think it's funny. They rejoice in that. We think about this idea of wrath and anger and clamor. We again, I like this idea, but let those things, we talked about that in class, they put them away from you. Doesn't mean we're not going to, there aren't going to be times when we might be tempted by these things, but we got to put those behind us. And so we're going to notice now and spend some time noticing some of the forms of sinful anger. We talked about today, there can be righteous anger, right? There can be legitimate things that can make us angry and get us upset. But there are some forms and some things that we can look at and say, you know what, this is not good for me to be angry for this reason. And so we're going to notice a few of these. The first one is bitterness, a spirit of resentment. Resent or jealous of others. It seems ironically, this happens a lot in family. When maybe a brother or sister accomplishes some good thing or achievement, and we're resentful. We're envy about it, and we're upset, right? We get angry about it because all the attention's on them, or just resent someone else. Someone else has been given some position, and you wish that was you, and so we feel resentful. When that happens, that's not a good thing to be angry about. That's a sinful anger when we are resentful toward others. Again, just having wrath, being angry, boiling, agitated feeling. Can you tell when someone's really angry, upset? I can tell you, I can hide them probably as good as anybody, but if it's really boiling up and I'm really angry about it, it's hard to hide it, right? From anyone. You can tell when somebody's just, their complexion gets red, they're ready for a fight, and you can see it. That kind of anger is not good. There's no good going to come of that. And we can't let ourselves, we talked about the idea of being controlled, but just getting agitated and angry, that's sinful anger. We need to be, I'm not saying there aren't going to be things that cause us to get upset, but to let that boil in us. Anger, it sees within a man and may break out in some word or action which attacks the person or character of the one against whom it expresses contempt. This is the idea, okay, this is an anger where we actually respond, right? We get so upset and angry, we actually do something, or we say something. We talked about sporting events a little bit today, but it can happen in any kind of an event where we lash out at someone or say something to someone. We can't pull those words back. We even talked about how we can say things about someone and it lingers on and carries on. We're going to actually talk a little bit about that here in a little bit. And then we've got clamor, the outburst of noisy contentions. The original word meant to cry out. You ever see somebody they're yelling and they're screaming? And I'm telling you, when you have that kind of anger coming out of you, when you're literally raising your voice to an elevated position, I'm telling you, that's not a good anger. That is not the right way to handle your children or anyone you fall out with. You need to have control. Slander, railing or accusing another, same word which is used of those who blaspheme the name of God. That's like, you know what? Darren lies over there all the time. He's constantly lying. He says one thing, but he does something else. People out, these people out here, I know that they hate him because of the way he is at work. That's just slandering him, right? That's just speaking evil against him. And I'm most likely, I'm probably jealous of him, or maybe he's got something that I'm envious of. But that's what slander is, and that's evil. That's it. That's sinful anger. When we let anger boil in us to the point where we're speaking evil against others and slandering others, that's wrong. Let's talk about, obviously, sinful anger can occur and happen. So what causes it? What causes an individual to engage in sinful anger? Well, the first thing is, and probably maybe one of the more important ones or most common ones, is not getting our way. In a simple example of children, and you can tell their child no, and they don't like it, they get angry, right? They'll stomp and they'll yell and they'll kick and they'll get so mad and angry. But the same thing can happen to us if we don't get our way. There are a lot of decisions got to be made, even in the congregation. Sometimes we may not agree with everything, and if I don't get my way, and if they don't do what I want, that can cause us to get angry and have a sinful anger, feeling rejected, being excluded or overlooked or mistreated. This can happen many times. When I think that all these people are getting together, there's a get together, right? And I didn't get invited. You need to be sensitive to that, by the way. There's certain people get left out for some reason. People like to be invited. You invite Sue and I over, well, almost surely we like going places. But sometimes we get excluded, and we get angry about it, right? We start actually responding or doing or saying things about people because they didn't include us. And that happens sometimes. So it's just feeling rejected, that nobody wanted you, can cause us to have sinful anger. Loss, losing what we cherish, or simply just fearing that loss can cause us to get angry. You know, especially if we're experiencing all these bad things and losses, and the other folks over here, everything just seems to be going their way. Everything's just fantastic. And it can cause us to be mad and angry and not have the right kind of heart and cause us to act sinfully. Disappointment, unmet expectation. You disappoint me, I can get angry about that. And you know what? We get disappointed, right? But it doesn't have to cause us to be angry about it and lead to what we call sinful anger. Injustice, when we're mistreated. And this is probably one of the bigger ones. If somebody mistreats me, it's hard really not to get angry and not respond, right? When somebody mistreats you, does something to you that you didn't deserve, you're going to get even. You get back at them. Feeling inadequate, comparing our life to the lives of others may upset us. Again, this idea that, doom is me. Depression can cause it. We're depressed and mad because things are going so well for everybody else. And we can just be angry. Those are the wrong reasons. And again, these are all causes of sinful anger. So what's the consequences when this happens? When we have sinful anger and we fall into that trap, what happens as a result of that? The physical effects of anger are both immediate and long-term. It's devastating to the body to carry bitterness, hatred, and an unforgiving spirit. It's amazing how having this kind of heart and being angry, it can affect individuals. It's devastating. It can cause, again, just being mad all the time. They're depressed. People that are angry and not happy, it's not good to be that way. You won't be happy. And nobody going to want to be around you. And have you been around people who are angry and constantly complaining about what's going on? It's not good. And nobody's going to want to be around you. It destroys relationships. When you're angry and you're constantly talking bad about other people, and even folks that might maybe engage a little bit in the conversation, eventually it's like, you know what, that's just depressing. I don't want to talk about that anymore. And I've had people in my life sometimes, and I know I've told this story before. Oliver Lucas, he used to come to our house at the farm, and he would at breakfast, and he just had talk about all the bad things that were happening. And I remember my mom finally said, Oliver, she made us breakfast every morning. She said, listen, if all you're going to do is come here and complain, she's like, I don't want you coming here for breakfast because you just depress me. I get depressed. And the same thing can happen when we have a sinful anger. It can destroy relationships and not just families, churches. When you've seen it, these outrages and being angry with one another, it can destroy the church. There's no place for it. Passive aggression. This is one I got to be careful of. Occurs when we're angry about something, but express our negative feelings in an indirect or passive way. So sulking, don't talk to someone, right? That's an easy way to do it. If you're mad and angry at someone, let's not resolve it. Let's not get this conflict out on the table and talk about it. I'll just avoid it. I'm just going to not address it. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to stay away from that person. I'm not going to talk to them. That's what they call passive aggression. That's being angry and letting that anger just set in that bosom, right? It's not being taken care of. You're not fixing it. We got to fix that. We can't allow that to fall into our bosom and have that anger in our hearts. And depression. Sometimes it can be chemical. I mean, there are reasons why some folks deal with depression more than others. That often it's the result of unresolved conflict in a person's heart. Sometimes we can get depressed because there's issues with individuals and we're not fixing it. If two people, doesn't mean we're not going to have conflict, but if two people are set on fixing things and they get together and not focus on, I gotta explain to you why I'm right and why you're wrong, but rather, you know what, let's put this to bed. I don't want to be angry with you anymore. I don't want this in my heart. It eats me up and it'll eat you up. You know, there's a story that it says a businessman gets, when he hops out of his car, he gets bit by a stray dog. So he's getting on his way to work, hops out, a stray dog bites him. And so he's so mad, when he goes into his business meeting, he chews out the management staff because he's just angry because he got bit by this dog. The managers are so mad because they just got chewed out. They got to go yell at somebody. So they go yell at all their workers and employees. Well, the employees yell. There's one employee there. He's got one peon working for him. And so he goes and yells at the peon and explains to him why he's useless and the peon's got no one to yell at. So what's he do? He goes home to his wife. And he yells at his wife. And she's got nobody to yell at, so she yells at her son. Then her son goes out. He sees he ain't got nobody to yell at. He sees a stray dog running, so he picks up a rock and hits that dog that bit the guy on the leg. And the stories really just kind of show you how anger, it doesn't stop. You influence others. When you have an angry heart and you act this way, you influence others around you. And it may just come around and bite you. Consequences of sinful wrath. Actually, open my Bibles. There's some verses talk about this. One of the most important things we got to guard against when we have this sinful wrath in our heart is, first of all, it represents a broken relationship with God. You know, sometimes we can fall out with one another and we can have problems with one another, but it becomes a really big problem when it affects our relationship with God. Matthew 5, verse 23 and verse 24. It says, therefore, if thou bring thy gift to the altar, and there rememberest that thy brother hath aught against thee. In this situation, it isn't that you have anger with God, you have anger with your brother and fault with your brother. Leave there thy gift before the altar and go thy way. First be reconciled to the brother, then come and offer thy gift. God doesn't want us to come in here if we've got anger and aught with our brothers and sisters and offer and worship him. He says, you go get reconciled with your brother or sister. And so one of the consequences of the sinful wrath is our relationship with God's affected. We may not realize that when you have this broken relationship with your brother or sister, it affects your relationship with God. In that same passage, we can see a couple other points. Matthew 5:21 says, ye have heard that it been said of them of old time, thou shalt not kill, and whosoever shall kill shall be in danger of the judgment. But I say unto you that whosoever is angry with his brother without cause shall be in danger of the judgment. And whosoever shall say to his brother, Raca, shall be in danger of the council. Whosoever shall say, thou fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. Then dropping down to verse 25 says, agree with thine adversary quickly, while thou art in the way with him, lest at any time the adversary deliver thee to the judge, and the judge deliver thee to the officer, and thou be cast into prison. Verily I say unto thee, thou shalt by no means come out thence till thou hast paid the uttermost farthing. And so another consequence of wrath and anger is violence and judgment. You're violent. It'll lead to us doing things, physical things, wrongful things. It also causes us to judge others. We don't care. We'll judge people and say things about them, and we don't care because our heart's full of anger. So that's another consequence. It also will lead to critical and a judgmental spirit. Matthew 7 verses 1 through 5. Judge not that you be not judged, for what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged. And with that, what measure ye meet, it shall be measured to you again. And why beholdest thou the mote that's in thy brother's eye, but considerest not the beam that is in thine own eye? Or how wilt thou say to thy brother, let me pull out the mote out of thine eye, and behold, a beam is in thine own eye? Thou hypocrite, first cast out the beam in thine own eye, then thou shalt see clearly to cast out the mote in thy brother's eye. And so when we have this sinful wrath and anger, it's going to cause us to be judgmental. And we're not going to see what's wrong with us. We're only going to see what's wrong with everybody else. It's also going to lead to broken relationship with other people. Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 29. Ephesians 4:29 says, let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth, but that which is good for the use of edifying, that thou may minister grace unto the hearers. We should be here to edify and encourage. When we have a sinful and anger in our hearts, we don't edify one another. In fact, it breaks these relationships. That relationship that we have with one another gets broken. There's no peace. Hebrews 12:14 and 15. Follow peace with all men and holiness, without which no man shall see the Lord. Looking diligently, lest any man fail of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up trouble you, and thereby many be defiled. And so the peace of God that we get as Christians is impacted, and it goes away. There is no peace. This peace and comfort that we get from God is destroyed. Emotional isolation, 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 7. 1 Peter 3 and verse 7. Because likewise ye husbands, again, talking about the marriage relationship, dwell with them according to knowledge, giving honor to the wife as unto the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of grace of life, that your prayers be not hindered. And so when we have this anger in our heart and we treat our wives in certain ways and say certain things to them and are angry with them, we can emotionally isolate ourselves. You're going to break down that connection you have with one another when you have that kind of expression. Same thing's talked about over in Colossians. In Colossians chapter 3 and verse 19. Colossians 3 and 19. His husbands, love your wives and be not bitter against them. Are we bitter with our wives? Are we angry? We speak evil toward them? That's going to lead to isolation. We're not going to have that connection, that bond we need to have. So that's the consequence of sinful wrath. And of course, frustration and anxiety. Philippians chapter 4. Philippians 4 and verse 5. It says, let your moderation be known unto all men. The Lord is at hand. And so you're going to be this anger in your heart. You're just going to get frustrated and you're going to have anxiety and stress. People that are angry, they're stressful. They're walking time bomb. And then finally, obstructionism. In chapter Acts, in the book of Acts, we'll look at a few verses here. Acts chapter 7 and verse 54. Acts chapter 7, verse 54. When they heard these things, they were cut to the heart and they gnashed on him with their teeth. Verse 57 says, then they cried out with a loud voice and stopped their ears and ran upon him one accord. Verse 58 says, and cast him out of the city and stoned him. And the witnesses laid down their clothes at the young man's feet by the name of Saul. And then finally there in chapter 11, in verse 2 of Acts, it says, and Peter was come up to Jerusalem, they were of the circumcision contended with him. And so we see in the New Testament how that this anger that they had caused them to obstruct the cause of Christ. And that same thing can happen to us. We don't realize that when we're being angry with one another, there should be more important things we're thinking about. How can I make this church stronger? How can I help us be a light and a salt to those in this community? And when we're so focused amongst ourselves fighting and being angry with one another, it obstructs that. It obstructs what we need to get done as a congregation. And so when we look at the consequences of sinful wrath, we need to be careful and guard against those things. So how do we handle our anger? Ephesians chapter 4, 26 through 32 says, be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your wrath, nor give place to the devil. Let him who stole steal no longer, but rather let him labor, working with his hands what is good, that he may have something to give to him that has need. Let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification, that it may impart grace to the hearers. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, by whom they were sealed for the day of redemption. Let all bitterness, with anger, clamor, and evil speaking be put away from you, with all malice, and be kind one to another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, even as God in Christ forgave you. And so we noticed these thoughts a little bit this morning, but it's okay to be angry, but we can't sin. And we need to make sure our anger is justified and it's controlled. We have self-control. And we talked about not letting the sun go down on our wrath. There's things that's going to cause us to be angry. We can't let that dwell in our hearts and sink in our hearts, because that's what the devil wants. And when we do that, we give place to the devil. That lets him come into our heart and fill our heart. And he can keep us from focusing on what we need to be focusing on as Christians. We need to rather be speaking about things that can edify. Instead of getting angry, think about, what can I do to edify and encourage one another? Again, somebody may say something against us, but we're told there what is good for necessary edification, that it may impart grace to the hearers. So what can I do to edify and encourage? Make the situation better. Sometimes we make mistakes, and we can apologize and say, you know what, I'm sorry, I really didn't mean that. Oh, yes, you did. Oh, yes, you did. I'm not letting you take it back. I'm never going to forgive you for saying that. And what happens? Sometimes people part ways and they never speak to one another. People make mistakes. Sometimes people say something and they don't really mean it. Deep down, they don't really mean it, but it happens. But when we let our own selfish, you're like, man, I got them now. They clearly made a mistake and I caught them. That's not the right attitude to have. We need to rather think about how we can edify and encourage one another and recognize, you know what? No man can tame the tongue, right? James 3:8. No man can tame it. It's an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. And so sometimes we say things, we don't mean it. We need to be able to handle our anger and be willing to forgive others when we're wrong. Other thing you need to do is you need to own up to your anger. There's, like I said, you can lose your temper, but you need to recognize. This is probably one of my dad's best traits, growing up. My dad got angry a lot when I was a kid. I got my hair pulled a lot. But I can tell you, if he went over the line and he did something and he knew he did, he always came to me and apologized. And you know what? I forgave him. I truly did. Because I knew that apology was sincere. It wasn't like, hey, I shouldn't have done that. And he wasn't sorry about it. He truly was sorry. He knew he lost his cool. As a kid, I that was totally fine with me. I recognized it, and I knew he was wrong. When he came and apologized, it was forgotten. And that was like, again, always was willing to say, you know what? I messed up. I got angry. I did something I shouldn't have. You need to identify the source of your anger. Sometimes we may think that we want to blame our spouse, right? I'm angry all the time because she doesn't treat me the way she should. In reality, there's something else that's causing you to be angry. You need to fix that, whatever that is. But sometimes we don't identify the true source. And as a result, we focus on the wrong things, right? I focus on trying to fix Sue. That's not the problem. It's usually my problem. But we need to make sure we identify the right source. And we need to deal correctly with anger quickly. Don't let it simmer. We need to nip it in the bud and actually get it under control. You know, I don't know if I did in this talk about, I think I did some lessons a while back. When you get angry, count to 10. If you get really, really angry, count to 100 before you respond. Recognize that when this happens, it doesn't mean we know there's sometimes we lose our cool and we'll get angry. We need to calm down. And again, we need to forgive others. Again, sometimes people are going to say something. And there's decisions. I'll bet there's individuals that made in here and maybe elders over the years wish they could go back and change it. I'm not saying that they did. I'm just saying there's times we don't always make the right decision. We're not perfect. But when folks make mistakes, and particularly if it's directed toward us, and they come to you and say, you know what, Dale, I'm sorry, man. I shouldn't have said that. I didn't mean it. We forgive them. We forgive them, and it's behind us. Be proactive. Learn about things that kind of, there's certain things can set you off, and recognize that. And just be aware of that. So if you have that and you recognize that, then when it happens, you're less likely. So we need to be proactive. We need to know God's will. We talk about how do you control our anger? How do we get it under control? It says, therefore, do not be unwise, but understand what the will of the Lord is. We need to read our Bibles. One of the things that will help you get control of yourself is to understand what God wants from you and recognize it's his will that I need to commit to my heart and follow, not my own will. And pray to God. We should pray for wisdom. And James 1:5 says, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally without reproach, and it will be given to him. Pray to God about it. Especially you may have issues with anger or a situation you've got with someone. Pray to God about it. Pray for wisdom. Always be ready to forgive. Imitate Jesus. Colossians 3:13, bearing with one another and forgiving one another. If anyone has a complaint against another, even as Christ forgave you, so you also must do. It's not your choice. When somebody comes to you and asks for forgiveness, and you say no, if you're a Christian, that's not your decision. It says you must do. Christ forgave us. We have to forgive one another. We need to have self-control. And 9:27 says, but I discipline my body, Paul said, and bring it into subjection, lest when I have preached to others, I myself should be disqualified. And so we need to have control of ourselves. That if we're going to truly control issues of anger, we've got to have control of ourselves. And then finally, we must acknowledge God's grace and focus on our blessings. That's the true key to not getting angry. Is these things, you think about what people get angry about. It's usually nothing that's important. It's really not. If we focus on the things that we need to focus on, you know what? God forgave me. And I am saved. How wonderful blessing that is. That's all that really matters. So this other stuff is, you can say what you want to me and do what you want to me. It doesn't matter. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, noble, just, pure, lovely, good report. If there's any virtue, if there's anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. So that's how we need to handle our anger. Focus on all the good things that you have and all the blessings from God. I'll leave you the same slide I had this morning. We have two choices. We can let anger fill our hearts, uncheck it, just emotionally react to whatever situation we find we're confronted with. And trust me, the worst of you will come out. You just say whatever comes to mind. It's not going to be good. And you're going to what? You're going to be a lonely individual. Nobody's going to like being around you. You're going to be miserable. And you know what? God's not going to be in your life. God's not going to have anything to do with you if we're that way. We need to rather focus on the story of Jesus, the gospel. What we need to do as Christians. Fill our heart with love and joy and peace. And that leads to eternal life. Listen very well. If you're never been obedient to the gospel, never been baptized, you have an opportunity to do that tonight. Or perhaps you haven't been living the way you should. Maybe you've said some things or done some things that have that you're not proud of and ashamed of, and you want forgiveness, and you want to even recognize that, acknowledge that with the brethren here. The Lord's invitation is open. If we can assist you in any way, please come while together we stand, while we sing.